2013 through 2016 BMW 435i oil filter housing reseal. I'm Brian from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of resealing the oil filter housing. You're going to need to get the front of the vehicle up in the air and remove the lower splash shields. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and get the vehicle up as high as you can so you can get under here. And you just follow around the perimeter, removing the 8mm bolts. Before I reinstall this cover after I'm done, I always give it a good pressure wash and wash all of that oil and debris off of it. Since we're resealing the oil filter housing, we're going to change the oil filter on it. So you might as well go ahead and drain the oil and go ahead and service it now. I recommend changing out the copper washer on the drain plug here. At the shop, we like to use man filters on BMWs, and they come with a new copper washer in the kit. I will link this filter up in the description of the video. Go ahead and put the drain plug in and re-secure it. We're going to lower the vehicle back down, but we're going to leave the splash shields off for now. Now we're going to remove the top engine cover. So you're just going to lift in the corners and lift it straight up and pull it off and then set it aside. So now I'm going to take off the air snorkel right here in the front here. And to do that, you're going to just loosen up the clamp here. And then we're going to pop this up. It's just pressed on with a grommet. And then we're going to disconnect the mass air. We're going to pop the clips off the lid. And then we also need to remove a bracket on the right side. So just to the right of the air cleaner will be this bracket. It's held on with 4 bolts. So you're going to remove the 4 bolts. And then you're going to set this bracket aside after you get that removed. Then you can go ahead and pop the air snorkel up here and go ahead and take it off and set it aside. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the oil filter. You're going to need this tool that goes over the cap. Put that on, then you use a socket or a wrench like this, and you go ahead and spin the oil filter cap off. I will also link this tool up in the description of the video. So go ahead and set this aside for now. So the housing here is going to be filled with oil, and I like to suck it out. I'm using my little fluid extractor here that we have at the shop. If you don't have something like this, you could use a turkey baster and just suck the oil out. Now I'm going to slide a bucket underneath the vehicle to catch some coolant, because we're going to remove this upper radiator hose, and when we do that, all that's going to run down below. And you're going to need to pop the clip out here on the radiator hose, so you can use a pick tool and pull the clip out like here. And then right here on the front of the radiator hose is another clip. You're going to pop that clip out. And then there's a vent line right here that has a clip that we're going to pull. So you can pop this clip up and pop it off like this. And then on the bottom of the radiator hose will be another line going onto it. So you're going to pop that clip out too. Once all the clips are removed, then you can grab the hose like this and kind of work it and wiggle it and pull the hose off here. Then you can pull the vent line hose off here. You just lightly wiggle and pull them off. And then you can pull the lower one off and then pull the radiator hose off the top. So after I'm done replacing the oil filter housing, I'm going to wash all this off. So I'm not too worried about the coolant getting on things. It actually helps wash some of the oil off. When you're taking this top vent line off, you want to be very careful. They are known to get fragile and break. If it happens to break on you, it's no big deal. You can replace the line. But it is possible that this line will break. So go ahead and take that off, and then you can go ahead and work the rest of the radiator hose off. I'm also going to replace this upper radiator hose, and the reason why is when the oil leaks, it leaks into the hose here and makes that seal swell and causes coolant leaks. So I recommend you replace this upper hose too. I'll be sure to link the hose up in the description of the video also. We need to remove the intake to get this oil filter housing off. So to do that, we need to remove this foam pad that's underneath the cowling here. So you can just work this foam pad out. It's just kind of pressed in there. You can just take your time and remove it. We need to remove or unbolt this manifold and pull it back due to one bolt. On older models, you can get to this bolt with a wobbler socket, but on this particular model, it's impossible to get to. So we need to pull it off. So if you look between the oil filter housing and the intake manifold right down there in the very corner, you can see that bolt I'm referring to, and you can't get to it with wobble sockets or anything, so we need to pull this manifold. So we're going to remove the 11mm nuts and bolts that are on the intake here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. We're going to remove all of those. But we're going to leave everything on the front of the intake here plugged in and hooked up. We're not going to disconnect anything. We're only going to pull this back far enough to get to the bolt and also change the gaskets out, and that's it. And to make quick work of that, I'm just going to use my Milwaukee 3/8 drive impact wrench here and a pencil magnet. So I'll remove the bolt or nut, and then I'll use the pencil magnet to catch it and pull it off. So I'll do that for all 7 of these fasteners. The very back bolt is hard to get to or difficult to get to, so I just did it by hand with a ratchet. Once you get all the bolts removed, you can go ahead and unplug the oil pressure switch here right on the oil filter housing. It just has a little squeeze tab. And to get to it, I used a little pick tool from underneath like this and kind of hooked it and pulled it off. And then this is what the tab is going to look like on the bottom, so you kind of hook it under there and pull it off. So there was a couple studs that had nuts on them. The ones with the studs, we need to remove those. And to do that, you need an E6 female torque socket right here. And you're going to put it on the end of the stud and go ahead and remove the studs from the vehicle. To make quick work of that, I use my Milwaukee M12 1/4-inch ratchet here. And once again, I used the pencil magnet to help remove or help retrieve the stud once I got it unbolted. Once you got the bolts removed and the studs removed, now the intake is free and loose, but we need to create some slack in the wiring harness here. So if you follow these 2 wires going over here to the oxygen sensor, these are the oxygen sensor connectors, you can unplug these, or you can pop them out of their little metal brackets right here. And that'll help give you more slack to maneuver the intake manifold into a much better position to work with it. Before we pull the intake manifold back to where we can work with it, we need to pull off some oil cooler lines. So you'll remove the 10mm bolt on the left and then the T30 torque bolt that's holding the line on. So that after you get that bolt removed, use a T30 socket and remove the bolt right here. So once you get the bolt removed, then you're just going to pull the 2 lines downwards and off like this. There's going to be some O-rings in here. We're going to change those out later. So the oil filter housing here is in 2 pieces. So we're going to remove the outer piece off first by removing the 3 bolts holding the outer piece on. So there's 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. You're going to need an E12 female torque socket to remove those bolts. I'm using the M12 3/8 drive ratchet here to make quick work of that. I'll link up all these ratchets and tools that I'm using in this video in the description. That way, if you're interested in any of those, you can find those links there. Once you get the bolts off, you can use a little rubber mallet and give it a little tap, and that'll pop the housing free. And now you're going to have a little bit of oil that spills out right here. You might want to clean this up with some brake clean, or what I also like to do is after I'm done, I use a pressure washer and I'll wash all this off. Now you're going to need an E10 torque wrench, and then we're going to remove this 1 bolt right here on the bottom. So you'll crack that free, and you're going to spin that out. You'll be able to spin it out by hand most likely, or you may have to work slowly, 1 little turn at a time. So when you go to take this bolt out, it's only going to come out so far and it makes contact with this hose here. So what we're going to do is we're going to loosen up the bolt here, and then we'll move the intake out of our way, and we'll take the bolt off here. And then we'll be able to pull it back, and then we'll be able to finish taking the bolt out. So I pulled the intake back, and I was able to get an extension straight on there like this and remove that bolt. Now I got the bolts removed, you can pull it back, and then you can finish removing the bolt here. That gives you enough space to get it out. Now that you got the housing off, you can clean up the surface here. You want to make sure when you clean it not to knock any dirt or debris down into the holes here. That drains directly back into the oil pan, so you don't want to get dirt and debris in there. So use rags and wipe it all up and clean it up. After that, we're going to clean up the oil filter housing and change out all the seals. To do that, you're going to need a pick tool, and you're going to pick out the O-rings. These are for the 2 oil cooler lines that we've removed. So we're going to pick out these O-rings here, and then we're going to take the housing here, and we're going to pick out the old seal gasket here on both sides. So you'll just pick it and peel it out, and you can flip it over and then peel out the seal. After that, you can clean the housings up with parts cleaner. So after removing the seals and cleaning them up, we're going to install the new O-rings here, and I will link these all up in the description of the video. For right now, we're going to install the bottom portion of the seal first, and then we'll install the top half later. Before we install the oil filter housing, we're going to change out the O-rings on the intake manifold. So I'll link these up in the description of the video. So there's 6 O-rings that we need to replace that seal the manifold back to the cylinder head. So the way we change these out is where we pull this manifold back as far as we can, and then with a pick tool you can reach around back and you can pick out the old O-rings, and then you can just reach around with your fingers and install the new O-rings on the back of the ports. It's pretty simple. You just maneuver the intake manifold left and right and kind of maneuver the wires out of your way, and you can get back there. One of the techniques I do is I pull the manifold back and I reach through from underneath, and you can get back there to help install or remove any of the O-rings. Now we can position the oil filter housing back into place, and then we can start all 3 of the bolts. Once all the bolts are run in until they're snug, I recommend tightening the bottom one here first. And you'll have to do this by hand with a wrench. You just tighten it up until it's snug and about a 1/4 turn more. Then you can tighten up the 2 other bolts. Now you can install the gasket and then reinstall the outer half of the oil filter housing, and then put the bolts in and tighten those down. Just run them in until they're snug and about a 1/4 turn more. Then you can reinstall new O-rings on the bottom of the lines that go into the housing, and then pop those into place, and then start the torque bolt through the T30, and you can go ahead and tighten that bolt down. Now I'm going to go ahead and install a brand new upper radiator hose. I will link this up in the description of the video. Also, I recommend that you change it out. I recommend that you lube up the O-rings and ports on the upper hose here to help them slide into position. You can use something like Vaseline. It works really well for this. So once you get that, you can go ahead and put the lower portion of the hose on, clip it into place. Then you can slide the upper neck onto the radiator, and then put the vent line on, and then put it onto the thermostat housing here. And once you got them all on and all the clips pushed back down into place, then you want to give all these a good tug to make sure that they don't pop back off, and make sure that they're really secure. Now we're going to position the intake manifold back into position and go ahead and bolt that back up. So you'll just lift the intake manifold into position, and then we're going to start the 2 studs first. I used a piece of paper in the socket and stuffed the stud in there, and that held it in place so it doesn't fall off, and it helped me guide it in there. So you'll line up the 2 studs, and you'll run those in and then tighten those down. You just tighten them down till they're snug. So I started these and ran them in by hand with a 1/4 inch ratchet. And just like I used to put the studs in, I used a piece of paper and put the in the socket and put the bolts in there. Now I'm going to line up all the bolts and run those in all by hand. So I'll start all of the bolts and run them in by hand, and then I'll put the 2 nuts on the studs and tighten those all up in a certain pattern. I'll show you that. Now that you got all the nuts and bolts run in until they're snug, now we need to torque the manifold down. We're going to torque it down to 12 foot-pounds. We're going to start in the middle, and then we'll move to the left, and then we'll move to the right, and we'll move back left, and we'll move back right, back left, and then do the final one back there in the corner. All of them done at 12 foot-pounds. Now you can go ahead and plug in the pressure sensor right here. Now we can change out the O-rings on our oil filter housing here, and then install our new filter. I will link this all up in the description. After that, we can install that into the filter housing, and you just spin it in until it's snug. So you'll run the filter cap in until it's snug, and then you don't want to over tighten these. I will link up the tools that I use in the video. Now we're ready to install the air cleaner assembly. So you'll hook it up to the ports, make sure the air box is clipped in, the mass airflow sensor is plugged back in, and then all the clamps are tightened. You're just going to do one last double check to make sure everything's re-secured. The mass air, the vent line, the grommet in the front, and the clamp are all tightened. Once that's all secure, you can install the bracket here on the corner and tighten that up. Then you can reposition all the wires that you got the slack in, the oxygen sensor wires here, plug those all back in and re-secure those. Then we can go ahead and feed this foam pad back under the intake here. And you can see where they mount. They have these little holes here, and there's little ports on the back here and the back here where they mount onto. You just take your time and work it underneath and then install that. Then you can take the top engine cover, install that over, and push it down into place. And then after we get the top engine cover installed, we're going to fill the car up with 8 quarts of BMW approved full synthetic motor oil. Now we're ready to fill the car up with coolant. So you're going to take the cap off, and then we're going to take the bleeder screw out here on the bottle, remove it completely. Now you're going to fill up the bottle until it's completely full and overflowing out of the bleeder screw and full at the very top of the neck. Then you can reinstall the bleeder screw. You want to screw it in until it's fully seated. It doesn't need to be super tight. It has a little O-ring that does the sealing, so just run it in until it's snug. Now we need to remove some of the coolant because it's an expansion tank, and so we need to suck out a little bit of the fluid. So you'll remove some of the coolant until you look inside the bottle, and you'll see a little mark indicating where the level is. Now you can run the vehicle until the thermostat opens up, and it's nice and warm. You double check your coolant level. You may go for a test drive. After that, what I like to do is I like to rack the vehicle back up and install the lower shields. And then I also like to take it over to a place where you can wash the engine and wash off any of the excess coolant and oil That will complete the job of replacing the oil filter housing on a BMW 435i. I will link up all the parts and tools in the description of the video.